Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Road to Recovery podcast. This podcast is a platform for education, discussion, and conversations on mental health. I'm your host, Amira Shah, and in this podcast, you'll get to know more about the therapeutic process, insight into life from the perspective of the psyche, and also join me in exploring current issues with other practitioners. I specialize in grief, but I'm always interested in learning about the human experience of the mind, heart, and spirit. So join me on this journey of in-depth learning about ourselves and the world we live in. Hi guys, today I have something really strange to speak about, and it is quite an impromptu decision to talk about this, but it's just a little experience on bird poop and gratitude. So yesterday morning, I went out to the garden to collect my laundry. Everything was nice and crispy, smelling like sunshine. And so I gathered everything and I realized that on a couple of my bras, a pair of socks, and another piece of undergarment, there were bird droppings. And we're not talking about bird droppings that are the ones you can kind of brush off. They definitely were not solid. We're talking about runny, greenish, a little bit of white, but mostly green. Green and brown, kind of like if you've got kids and you've ever had a child with colic, a little bit like that. So there were like splashes of colic bird poop over my undergarments and socks. And I didn't realize that initially, so I was happily collecting everything. And when I put it into my laundry basket, I was like, what the hell is on my hands? And I realized that a bunch of things had been pooped on. And I was like, dude, seriously? I mean, come on. Why are you shitting on my underwear? And also, they're white. Some of them are white. And I'm just thinking, look, usually organic stains, they come off pretty easily. But I'm not sure about, these green colic poop type stains, okay? Especially if it's not human. I haven't had very much experiences in, I guess, removing fecal matter that are not human from fabric. So anyways, I was just grumbling to myself a little bit. And then I looked up and I realized one thing. Why am I complaining? Because all around me in the garden, I'm surrounded by bamboo that grows way over the roof of the house. It's so lush. It's so green. Of course, I'm going to get lots of birds. I mean, if birds and cats and all sorts of reptiles love the area outside, and it is a beautiful area, and I live in this place, why am I complaining? If this place is good enough for bird and bird poop, and, it's so naturally appealing, it's so calming, it's so tranquil, I'm sure I can put up with a little bit of bird poop on my laundry, once every 6 months. Like, why am I complaining? Which brings me to think about the concept of gratitude. Because gratitude really unshackles us from, toxic emotions. The more we focus on negative thoughts and negative emotions, the more that part of our brain associates and grows, and the more we get caught up in more negative things. So it's not surprising that when researchers do studies around gratitude writing, or I'm sure at some point you've heard the practice or the exercise of writing 3 things you're grateful for every day. This practice it has a lot of mental health benefits, because what happens is your medial prefrontal cortex becomes activated and it starts to grow and it becomes stronger. So when this strengthens, it alleviates a lot of depressive symptoms, and you stay in your negative and low moods in a shorter period of time. And they've done fMRI scans for this, actually, where people who engage in more gratitude thoughts, or thoughts around gratitude, or practices of gratitude, they have more, I guess, neural sensitivity in their medial prefrontal cortex. And this part of the brain is associated with memory. It's associated with learning and decision making. So this kind of suggests that people who are more grateful are also more attentive to how they express gratitude. And if we don't have that lens, we don't cultivate that lens, we, I guess, would be looking at the world, at life, in a pretty shitty lens. And in my experience from yesterday morning, that lens could be, tainted with colic greenness. Anyways, I was just going back there, memory wise. But I've washed everything. I've rewashed them. I used my hands, and I'm like, that's okay. If I get some bird poop on my hands, it's nature, it's natural. If the birds are feeling so comfortable and so happy in this environment that it's just gonna happily poop all around the place, so be it. It means it's good enough for me to live in. And there's one other thing I do want to mention that I remember as a young child, maybe an adolescent. And, when you're going through puberty, you have a lot of issues. Sometimes they're not really anything that's particularly significant, but, hormones and all that. From time to time, you get into a pretty sad state, for whatever reason, also because I'm female, and trying to understand why that was happening, although that wasn't really my, I guess, emotional baseline or my predisposition. I tend to be quite chirpy, but there were some times when I started to realize that, hey, this is strange. I'm feeling quite low at certain times of the month, or there are some mood swings and a bit of emotional waves happening that was not normal in my previous experiences growing up. So I looked into that, and this was probably, we're talking about maybe almost 20 years ago. I looked into that. There wasn't very much literature around this at the time, and I was also living in in Saudi Arabia, so a really closed environment, a really closed country in terms of getting information and learning. So I did somehow stumble upon the gratitude exercise, and I did that when I was away on a summer holiday somewhere. I don't remember where. I got hold of a book or an article saying that it's really good to write 3 things that you are grateful for every day, and make that into a practice. And I didn't think much of it. I remember at the time in my mind, I was like, well, that was like pretty stupid, whatever. And then a few years later, this practice, I decided to revisit the idea of the practice, and I did that because I was doing my postgraduate certificate or diploma in professional counseling, and that came up again. And then generally at the time, I was in a really healthy emotional space and mental space, but I'm like, okay, fine, since I'm studying this, I'll give it a shot, see what it's about. And I did it for a little bit of time, and then I dropped it. I'm like, look, it doesn't really help all these things that they say, that it helps with your mental health and your resilience and, your happiness and your mental schemas, your thought processes. It doesn't really help. I'd rather, express my gratitude and show it when it happens in real life, and it's just more natural, right? And I didn't really realized till much, much later, when I was actually forced to do the practice as part of an assignment for an extended period of time, that the mental health benefits of gratitude writing, these exercises, whether it's writing or whatever it is that you choose to do, you choose to express your gratitude, but regularly on a daily basis in more than one area, maybe like 2 to 3 times a day, the benefits, the mental health benefits, in the sense of feeling, in alleviating mood, in decision making and learning, in memory, doesn't really kick in unless you've been doing it for a couple of weeks. And the longer you do it, as you know, it becomes a practice. When you express gratitude, whether personally or interpersonally, the longer you do it, the more ingrained it becomes, right? With anything that we practice. So this, in a sense, is a mental practice. It is also a spiritual practice. And spiritual practices, as we know, have a very significant impact on one's mental health. And that's also because spiritual experiences can be seen, and the benefits of that can be observed through the fMRI scans in the same spot, the medial prefrontal cortex, because that middle part of the brain has a lot to do with centering yourself. It has a lot to do with the strength of it and the sensitivity of it. Has a lot to do, has a really direct, let me find my words, relationship with psychopathology in terms of depression. So people who are not very sensitive neurally in that part of the brain are more susceptible to depression, major depression. So do yourself a favor. Next time you see some bird poop on your laundry, or you get shat on, while walking, and I'm pretty sure that happens a lot in Australia, just think to yourself, well, this place is nice enough for a bird to fly over to hang out, then it's good enough for me to be around, and it's probably going to be around some trees, some green, appreciate it, and just express that gratitude, whether internally or externally. And this is how I'm doing it today. I am just podcasting about it in a verbal sense because I had that thought process, and I'm just wondering who else out there might have such a thought process when bird poop is involved. We can always turn something not so welcomed, not so appealing, into something funny, or something to learn from, or an expression of gratitude. And it's all about reframing and flexing that creative muscle and how you want to reframe the shitty things in your life. That's all for now, and until next time, bye.